The moment John Ellis pointed his small finger through the cage bars at the old black cat, the one every volunteer had quietly stopped trying to adopt out, the entire room went still. Not because anything loud happened, not because anyone said a word, but because Crystal, a 9-year-old black cat who had not moved toward a human visitor in over 14 months, stood up. Slowly, deliberately, like she'd been waiting. She walked to the bars. She pressed her nose against John's finger. And John Ellis, 5 years old, sitting in a wheelchair he had been in since before he could remember, looked back at his mother, Nicole, with eyes so wide and so full that she had to press her hand over her mouth to keep from crying right there in the middle of the Maplewood Animal Shelter hallway. "Mama," he whispered, "Mon, she sees me." What happened in the weeks that followed changed 3 lives: a boy, a cat, and a shelter worker named Donna Peterson, in ways none of them could have predicted. But to understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to understand what came before it. You have to understand the 18 months that led John Ellis to that cage. If you've ever felt invisible, or watched someone you love feel that way, stay with this story. It goes somewhere you won't expect. And if it moves you the way it moved everyone who was there that day, tell me in the comments how you felt that day. Nicole Ellis had learned to read the silence. There was the silence that came before John asked for something, a particular kind of held breath, like he was building up to it. There was the silence after a doctor's appointment, when he'd process what he'd heard in the car on the way home by staring at the passing trees without blinking. And there was the silence she dreaded most, the one that came in the evenings when the neighborhood kids were outside, and John sat at his bedroom window, watching them. He never said anything during that silence. He just watched. John had been born with spina bifida, a condition that affected the development of his spinal cord and left him with limited mobility in his lower body. He'd had his first surgery at 3 days old. By 18 months, he and Nicole had already logged more hospital hours than most people accumulate in a lifetime. By the time he was 3, he had a chair, a schedule of therapies, and a mother who had quietly rearranged her entire world around his. Nicole was a practical woman. She didn't wallow, and she didn't let herself spiral when the worry crept in at 2 in the morning. She had a job as an accounts coordinator at a mid-sized insurance firm, a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a building that had, thankfully, an elevator, and a rotating cast of extended family members who helped with pickups and drop-offs when her schedule got complicated. She managed things. What she couldn't manage was John's loneliness. It wasn't that he had no friends. His preschool had been wonderful about inclusion, and there were 2 boys in particular, Marcus and a child everyone called Beeb, who had attached themselves to John with the uncomplicated loyalty that very young children are capable of. They came over sometimes on weekends. They played games, watched movies, built elaborate structures out of blocks on the living room floor. But there was a layer underneath the playfulness that Nicole could see, and John couldn't quite name. At the playground, when the other kids scrambled up the climbing structure, John watched from below. At birthday parties, when the children ran shrieking through the backyard in a game of tag, John sat near the snack table. He participated. He laughed. He was, by most measures, a cheerful and resilient little boy. But he watched from windows. That was the phrase that had lodged in Nicole's heart like a splinter she couldn't reach. He watched from windows, and no matter how much she rearranged and advocated and problem-solved, she couldn't always climb up there with him. She had tried everything she could think of over the years. Music classes adapted for wheelchair users, a swim program at the YMCA, a library story group where the librarian, a tremendous woman named Ms. Fay, had immediately rearranged the seating circle so John was never on the outside of it. These things helped. They filled the hours. They gave John skills and confidence and a sense of belonging that Nicole nurtured carefully. But something was still missing, and it took Nicole 2 full years to figure out what it was. It was reciprocity. Every friendship John had, every relationship really, involved other people accommodating him, adjusting, being kind and inclusive in ways that were real and generous, but that still required John to receive rather than simply be. Adults helped him. Children included him. But nobody needed him back. Nobody sought him out, not because they were being kind, but because they genuinely wanted what only John could give. Nicole sat with that realization for a long time before she figured out what to do with it. The idea came to her not in a flash of inspiration, but in a slow, accumulating way, the way most good ideas do. She was reading an article online about pediatric occupational therapy and animal-assisted interventions when she clicked on a link, almost by accident, to a piece about shelter cats and the volunteers who cared for them. The article was mostly about older cats, cats past kittenhood, cats who had been returned or overlooked, cats who sat in their kennels week after week while younger, flashier animals got adopted. She read the whole thing. Then she sat back and thought about John at his window. She thought about what it would mean for him to be in a place where an animal's response to him wasn't shaped by training or human instruction or social rules. A cat didn't know about wheelchairs. A cat didn't adjust its behavior out of politeness or inclusion philosophy. A cat either came to you or it didn't, and the reason it came had nothing to do with what it was supposed to do. Nicole looked up the Maplewood Animal Shelter. She found their website, their visiting hours, their adoption policies. She read about their cat wing and their volunteer program, and then, on a Saturday morning in late September, she told John they were going somewhere new. "Where?" he asked, eyes still on the cartoons. "You'll see," she said. "I think you're going to like it." She had no idea. So Donna Peterson had been working at the Maplewood Animal Shelter for 11 years. She had started as a weekend volunteer, the way most long-timers do, pulled in by a friend, guilted into one Saturday shift, and then quietly unable to leave. Within 6 months, she was volunteering 4 days a week. Within 2 years, she'd taken a part-time position in the cat care department. By the time she was 53, she was the shelter's lead cat care coordinator, a title that sounded modest until you understood what it actually involved. Donna knew each cat, not just their names and intake dates and medical histories, though she knew those too. She knew their personalities, their triggers, their fears, their particular ways of expressing contentment. She knew which cats needed to be approached from the left and which would always turn their back first, and then slowly, almost imperceptibly, edge closer until they were touching you. She knew which ones had been failed by humans, and which ones had simply never had the chance to trust one. The shelter's cat wing had 42 kennels arranged in 2 facing rows along a wide corridor. Most cats cycled through within a few weeks. Kittens were always in demand, and healthy young adults with good temperaments usually found homes within a month. But there were always a handful who stayed longer, the ones who were older, the ones who were too shy or too assertive or too particular in ways that didn't photograph well. Crystal had been there the longest. She'd come in 14 months ago as a surrender. Her owner had died, like a 78-year-old man named Harold Getz, who had apparently been Crystal's entire world for the better part of 9 years. The intake paperwork noted that Crystal had been Harold's companion since she was a kitten, that she'd slept on his bed every night, that she was described by Harold's daughter as not really a cat person's cat. What that meant, Donna had quickly learned, was that Crystal didn't warm to strangers. She didn't perform. She didn't purr on command, or nudge ankles, or do any of the things that made other cats instantly adoptable. What Crystal did was wait. She sat in the back of her kennel with her striking amber-green eyes half closed and her posture entirely composed, and she evaluated every person who walked past her with a kind of patient, exhausting intelligence. Well, people reached through the bars and she didn't flinch, but she didn't lean in either. She observed. She decided. And in 14 months, she had decided, apparently, that none of the hundreds of people who had passed through were worth moving toward. Volunteers loved her. Donna loved her. She was clearly not suffering. She ate well. She groomed carefully. She occasionally deigned to accept a slow chin scratch from Donna during her morning rounds. But she was, in all the ways that mattered for adoption, closed. Donna had begun to quietly accept that Crystal might live out her remaining years at the shelter. It wasn't the worst outcome. The shelter was warm and safe, and Crystal was comfortable. But Donna was a woman who believed in the particular kind of wholeness that only came from being genuinely known by something. And it pained her to see Crystal's particular intelligence with nowhere to land. She was thinking about this, not directly, but in the background, the way you think about things that have settled into a low hum of concern. When the door at the end of the corridor opened on that Saturday morning, and Nicole Ellis came in, pushing a small boy in a wheelchair and looking simultaneously hopeful and uncertain in the way of parents who have planned something carefully and are now suddenly afraid it won't work. "Hi there," Donna said, walking toward them. "First time visiting?" "Yes," Nicole said. "My son John wanted to see the cats." She glanced down. "Say hi, baby." John looked up at Donna with the particular evaluating expression of a 5-year-old who takes new adults seriously. Yeah, he had on a blue and yellow striped polo shirt, and his hands were folded in his lap, and his eyes, Donna noticed immediately, were extraordinary. Dark and clear and unhurried, the kind of eyes that seemed to be processing more than most children his age. "Hi," he said. "Hi yourself," Donna said. "My name's Donna. You can call me Donna or Miss Donna, whichever feels right." "Miss Donna," he said, as though confirming it for the record. She smiled. "You like cats, John?" He considered this with genuine seriousness. "I don't know yet," he said. "I haven't met enough of them." Donna looked at Nicole. Nicole looked back with the exhausted, affectionate expression of a mother whose child has been saying things like that since he could talk. "Well," Donna said, "you're about to meet 42. Now let's see what you think." They started at the beginning of the corridor. Donna walked slowly, keeping pace with Nicole pushing John's chair, and she introduced each cat as they passed. She gave them names and small histories, the way a good guide gives context to what you're seeing. "This is Butterscotch. He was found under a highway overpass, loves to have his cheeks rubbed. This is Minerva. She's only been here 2 weeks, a little shy still. These are the twins, Pip and Spot. They came in together, and we're hoping to adopt them out together too." John watched each cat carefully. He was polite. He said hi to the ones that were awake, observed the ones that were sleeping, asked occasionally quiet questions that showed he was paying attention. "Why is that one's fur like that?" And, "Does she always sit like that?" And once, about a particularly large tabby named Gerald. "He looks like he's thinking about something." But nothing happened. Cat after cat glanced at the newcomers and returned to their business. A few approached the bars with the exploratory interest that cats sometimes showed new visitors. 2 or 3 sniffed John's hand when he held it out. One young orange cat with a dramatic personality pressed himself against the kennel door and meowed loudly, and John laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him. But the choosing, the specific, unmistakable recognition that Nicole had been hoping for, didn't come. She watched John's face, and she could see him staying open, staying patient, trying each encounter with genuine willingness. She felt a slow tightening in her chest that she recognized as the particular dread of a parent watching something they'd hoped for not quite happen. They were 2/3 of the way down the corridor when Donna slowed a little and her expression shifted, just slightly, just enough that Nicole noticed. "That one at the end," Nicole said quietly, nodding at the last kennel on the right. "Who is that?" Donna paused. "That's Crystal," she said. "She's been with us the longest. She can be particular about people. She doesn't usually respond much to visitors. Particular how? She just chooses who she engages with." Donna searched for the right words. "She's not unfriendly. She's just very deliberate. In 14 months, I've seen her choose maybe 3 people to actually approach, and one of them was a staff member who'd known her for months." Nicole looked at the kennel at the end of the row. She could see a dark shape in the back, still composed, watching. "Can we go see her?" Donna hesitated for a fraction of a second. Not reluctance, exactly. Something more like the preparatory breath you take before witnessing something you aren't sure you're ready to see either way. "Of course," she said. They moved down the corridor. John hadn't said much in the last few minutes. He'd been quieter as they moved through the kennels, still engaged, still watching, but with a quality of attention that had shifted from curious to something more searching. As if he was looking for something specific, now, without quite knowing what it was. Crystal's kennel was at the end of the row, slightly larger than some of the others. She had a padded bed, a scratching post, a small elevated platform she'd apparently never used. She was sitting on the floor of the kennel, about 2 feet from the bars, perfectly still, her black fur almost indistinguishable from the shadows in the back corner, except for the extraordinary amber green of her eyes. Those eyes were already on John. He rolled forward a few inches and looked at her. She looked at him. The corridor had 20 other cats in it, and the soft, ambient sounds of an animal shelter. Distant barking from the dog wing, the hum of the climate system. The faint radio Donna kept playing at low volume. But in that small space at the end of the row, there was a silence that felt different from the rest. "Hi," John said, to the cat, in the same tone he'd said it to every other cat, but quieter. Crystal didn't move, and John leaned forward slightly in his chair, the way he always did when something had his full attention. He raised his right hand and extended one finger through the bar, not grabbing, not reaching aggressively, just offering. The same thing he'd done at every kennel. Donna was standing 3 feet behind him, and she held her breath. Nicole watched her son's small finger through the bars and the black cat in the shadows, and she didn't breathe either. 3 seconds. 5. 10. And then Crystal stood up. She didn't rush. That was the thing Donna kept coming back to afterward, when she tried to describe it to the other staff and found the description falling short every time. Crystal didn't rush. She moved with the same unhurried certainty she brought to everything, uncrossing the kennel floor in that loose-limbed way of cats who are entirely at home in their bodies. And she reached the bars and pressed her nose against John's finger. And then she pushed her whole face into his hand. The sound that came out of John Ellis was not a laugh and not a gasp. It was something in between, a small, involuntary exhale of pure astonishment. The sound a person makes when something they wanted so badly they'd stopped admitting they wanted it suddenly, without warning, happens. He looked back at Nicole. "Mama," he whispered. "She sees me." Nicole had spent 5 years building the kind of composure that let her sit through medical appointments and IEP meetings and playground moments without showing the full weight of what she was feeling. She had learned to be the steady one, the practical one, the one who kept moving. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Donna turned away for a moment, ostensibly to check on something in the supply area. She was crying. She wasn't ashamed of it, but she didn't want to make it about herself. John had turned back to Crystal. He was talking to her now in a low, steady voice. Not baby talk, just conversation. The way he talked to adults he was sizing up. He told her his name. He told her he had a room at home that got a lot of afternoon sun, and that he had a stuffed elephant named Peanut, who was very serious and would probably like her. He told her she was very beautiful, and that he understood about not wanting to talk to everyone, because sometimes he didn't either. Crystal listened. She stayed at the bars the entire time. She didn't retreat, didn't redirect her attention, didn't lose interest. When John paused, she blinked slowly, the way cats do when they're communicating trust, and John, who had never been told what that meant, blinked back instinctively, like he already knew. Donna came back. "How long has she been here?" Nicole asked. Her voice was steady again, mostly. 14 months, Donna said. Nicole looked at her. "That's a long time." "It is. She's 9 years old. Her owner passed away. She doesn't connect with most people. Or she hadn't." She looked at John, still deep in conversation with the cat at the bars. "I don't know what to make of this, honestly. I've never seen her do this with a child." "I want to adopt her," Nicole said. Donna looked at her. She had been at this shelter long enough to know the difference between an impulsive, in-the-moment request and a decision that had weight behind it. This had weight. "I should tell you," Donna said carefully, "that Crystal is not an easy cat. She's healthy, she's clean, she's not aggressive, but she takes time to trust. She may be withdrawn for weeks in a new environment. We can wait," Nicole said simply. "John knows how to wait." Something shifted in Donna's expression. A careful, guarded thing she carried gave a little. "There's paperwork," she said. "A home visit. We'll need to talk through her medical history. It's a process." "Okay," Nicole said. "We'll do the process." John had turned around. His eyes were bright. "Are we going to take Crystal home?" Nicole looked at him. "If everything goes the way it should, yes. But it takes a little time, baby." He nodded, completely seriously. "That's okay," he said. "Good things take time, and that's what you always say." Nicole Ellis put her hand on her son's shoulder and looked at the black cat at the end of the row, who was still watching them with those extraordinary amber-green eyes. "Yeah," she said softly. "That's what I say." The 2 weeks of the adoption process were, for John Ellis, the most purposeful 2 weeks he'd had in recent memory. This was not because they were easy. They weren't. The waiting was real and sometimes hard, especially on the evenings when John's energy ran out before his questions did. "Do you think she's okay tonight?" he asked Nicole at least once every day. "Do you think she's missing us? Do you think she remembers me?" Nicole answered each question with the same careful honesty she always brought to him. "I think she's comfortable and safe. I don't know if she's missing you, but I think you made an impression on her, and I think she probably does remember." What made the waiting purposeful was that John had things to do. He threw himself into preparation with a seriousness that Nicole found both endearing and a little humbling. He spent a full afternoon, with help, rearranging his room so that there was a clear, wide path from the door to the window, where he planned to put Crystal's bed. He informed Nicole with great authority that cats like to watch birds, and that the window in his room got good afternoon light, which he had assessed by sitting there for 45 minutes, with a book and occasionally looking up at the window in a professional way. He made a list. An actual list, dictated to Nicole and written in her handwriting while he supervised. Food dish, water dish, brush, something to scratch, on toys that didn't require chasing, because he'd thought about this and decided that some cats might not want to be chased after. A bed that was low enough for Crystal to get into easily since she was older. 9 isn't that old, Nicole said. It's old for a cat, John said. Miss Donna told me. She said Crystal is a senior cat. Senior means older. Senior cats need comfortable things. Nicole bought the things on the list. Donna called 3 times during the 2 weeks, more than the standard protocol required. She told herself it was because this was an unusual placement and warranted extra attention. She also told herself she wasn't thinking about Crystal's kennel every morning when she arrived, wasn't watching her more carefully than the others, wasn't slightly holding her breath each day to see if the change in the cat persisted. It did. Crystal had shifted. Not dramatically. She wasn't suddenly sociable, wasn't greeting new visitors with the openness she'd shown John. But there was a different quality to her stillness. The shelter's regular morning volunteer, a young man named Terrence, had mentioned to Donna that Crystal had been acting weird. When he pressed for specifics, he said she'd started sitting at the front of her kennel during morning rounds instead of in the back. Like she's watching for something, he said. Donna knew what she was watching for. The home visit was conducted by the shelter's adoption coordinator, a meticulous woman named Sandra, who had been doing this work for 8 years and brought to it a cheerful thoroughness that people sometimes found intimidating. Or she showed up on a Wednesday afternoon with a clipboard and a practiced smile, and left 40 minutes later with her clipboard full of ticks and a soft expression she hadn't had when she arrived. "The boy showed me his room," she told Donna later. "He had the whole thing set up already, every single thing. The bed is positioned facing the window. He told me, very seriously, that he'd researched the best angle for afternoon bird watching." "He's 5, Donna said. "He's 5 going on 45, and he loves that cat already," Sandra said. "Approve the adoption." Donna approved the adoption. They picked Crystal up on a Saturday. Nicole had asked if John could be the one to carry the carrier to the car, and Sandra and Donna had looked at each other and figured out a way. They put the carrier in John's lap. It was a soft-sided carrier, lighter than a hard case, and John held it against his chest with both arms, very steady, very careful, all the way down the corridor and through the lobby and out to the parking lot. Crystal, inside the carrier, did not make a sound. "Is she scared?" John asked. "Probably a little," Donna said. She was walking alongside him, one hand ready but not hovering. New things can be scary, even when they're good. John thought about this. "I know," he said. "I get scared of new things sometimes, but then they usually turn out okay." "That's been my experience too," Donna said. At the car, John carefully handed the carrier to Nicole to secure in the back seat, and then he asked if he could say goodbye to Miss Donna. "Of course," Nicole said. John turned his chair toward Donna and looked up at her. "Thank you for taking care of Crystal," he said. "Or for a long time. Until I could come." Donna Peterson, who had been working with shelter animals for 11 years and thought she had a reasonable handle on her emotions in professional contexts, crouched down to his level and put her hands on the arms of his chair and said, "You're welcome, John. She was worth waiting for. And so were you." He hugged her. She hugged him back. She stood up and watched the car pull out of the parking lot and reminded herself to finish the afternoon's kennel checks, and definitely did not stand in the parking lot longer than was strictly necessary. She stood there for a while. On the drive home, John sat in the back seat next to the carrier, with 2 fingers laced through the mesh, touching Crystal's fur. He talked to her the whole way. Nicole drove and listened, and did not trust herself to say anything. Donna had prepared them. She'd gone through the standard guidance for introducing a cat to a new home. Set up one room first. Let the cat explore at her own pace. Don't force interaction. Give her hiding spots. Keep the environment calm for the first few days. She'd been particularly careful to temper expectations. Crystal had been through a lot. She was older. She might retreat. It might take weeks before they saw the connection that had emerged at the shelter. "Don't be discouraged if she hides," Donna had said. "It doesn't mean anything bad. It's just how cats process change." "I know," John had said. "I'll leave the door open." Donna had blinked. Yes, that's actually a good instinct. Not the bedroom door necessarily, but giving her options for movement. How did you know that? When I go somewhere new, I like to know I can leave if I need to, John said. It makes it easier to stay. Donna had written that down in the shelter's notes, partly as practical insight for future placements, and partly because she didn't want to forget it. They set Crystal up in John's room as planned. Nicole put the carrier on the floor, unzipped the top, and stepped back. John stayed in his chair near the window, not close to the carrier, not hovering, and waited. For 20 minutes, Crystal did not move. John read a book, or pretended to read a book. He was actually watching over the top of it, with the careful patience of someone who understood that rushing would ruin everything. At 23 minutes, Crystal put one paw out of the carrier. John did not move. At 26 minutes, Crystal came fully out. She sat at the edge of the carrier for another 4 minutes, looking at the room. She looked at the window. She looked at the scratching post Nicole had positioned in the corner. She looked at the low bed with the fleece blanket John had picked out, dark gray. Because she's black, and I thought she'd feel normal on it, he'd explained with great logic at the store. She walked to the bed. She sniffed it. She stepped onto it, turned in a circle twice, and lay down. John exhaled very slowly. "Hi," he said, very quietly. Crystal looked at him, blinked once, slowly. He blinked back. That night, when Nicole came to check on John around 9:30 and found him asleep, Crystal was on the bed beside him, not on top of him, not pressed against him. She was a dignified cat and maintained her standards. But close. 6 inches from his side, curled in a precise circle, breathing steadily. Nicole stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she went to the kitchen, sat at the table, and let herself cry for a little while. Not from sadness, not exactly, but from the particular overwhelming feeling of watching something you desperately wanted for your child, quietly, without fanfare, come true. She texted Donna. She slept next to him first night. Already. Donna's response came at 10:45, which meant she'd been awake. "I am not remotely surprised. Take care of each other." The weeks that followed were unremarkable in the way that genuinely good things often are. Crystal learned the apartment. She learned the schedule, the morning sounds, the particular quality of light in the afternoon, the sound of John's chair on the kitchen floor that meant he was coming for breakfast. She learned Nicole's quieter presence, the difference between Nicole moving through the apartment on ordinary errands and Nicole sitting still in the living room in the evenings, which Crystal decided she approved of and sometimes joined. She learned John's particular physicality, the way he moved, the spaces he occupied, the habits of his hands. She learned that his wheelchair was not threatening. She learned, with what seemed like genuine intellectual interest, that the wheels made a sound she could track from across the apartment, and that the sound reliably meant John was coming toward whatever she was doing. She started coming toward the sound. This was the thing that broke Nicole open quietly, over and over in those first weeks. Crystal had learned to come to John, not because he was calling her, so not because there was food involved, though Crystal had strong feelings about meal times, but because she wanted to be where he was. She followed him from room to room with the unhurried certainty of someone who has decided where their home is. John, in turn, learned Crystal. He learned that she liked to be brushed, but only for 5 minutes at a time, and then she was done. He learned that she didn't like loud sounds, and that the best way to help her when something startled her was to stay still and talk to her in a low voice, not to reach for her, because reaching felt like grabbing, and Crystal had opinions about being grabbed. He learned that she had a spot on the back of her neck, just below where her head met her spine, that when he touched it made her close her eyes with an expression of such absolute satisfaction that it seemed almost rude to stop. He learned her language, and what Crystal taught him What she gave him that Nicole had been hoping for, without being able to name it exactly, was the experience of being needed back. Crystal needed John. She needed his presence and his voice and his particular quality of attention, which was unhurried and direct and took her seriously. She needed him in the mornings, when she came to sit beside his chair while he ate breakfast. She needed him in the afternoons, when she positioned herself in the patch of sunlight near his window and expected him to come and sit nearby. She needed him on the evenings when something outside made her tense, a car backfiring, or a dog barking in the hallway, and she would find him and sit close, not asking for anything, just drawing on his steadiness. He had things to give that a cat wanted. His slowness, which the world sometimes treated as a limitation, was to Crystal a profound gift. He didn't move fast and unpredictably. He didn't loom over her. He didn't reach without warning. His hands were gentle and patient, and always offered before they touched. His voice was low and real and never performed. He was, in all the ways Crystal had been waiting 9 years to find again, exactly right. Nicole watched this and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't fully known was tight. Not the worry. The worry was structural. It had its own foundation and didn't disappear. But something adjacent to it, and some layer of grief she'd been carrying about what John's life would not be, softened in the face of what it clearly was. He sat at windows us. It wasn't that the neighborhood kids suddenly included him differently, or that the world became more accommodating. It was that he had somewhere to be, someone who was waiting for him to come home. Donna got a text message from Nicole 3 weeks after the adoption. It contained a photograph. In the photograph, John Ellis was sitting in his wheelchair in front of his window, the afternoon sun coming in at the angle he'd assessed on that preliminary 45-minute reconnaissance. Crystal was on the windowsill beside him. Donna hadn't known the sill was wide enough for a cat, but apparently John had made some modification that involved a folded blanket and what Nicole described as a very thorough structural assessment, looking out at the yard below. John had his chin propped on his hand and was looking out too. They were not looking at each other. They were just there, together, watching the same world. Donna saved the photograph to her phone. She also did something she hadn't told Nicole she was going to do. She had been thinking, in the weeks since the adoption, about the other Crystals. Not literally. There was only one Crystal. But about the pattern she'd witnessed. A child who moved differently than most. An animal who had been waiting for something it couldn't describe. And the way those two things had recognized each other in a manner that bypassed the usual filters. She'd been turning it over. The way she turned over problems that didn't have obvious solutions, looking at it from different angles. The shelter had a community outreach program that had always been modest. School visits, the occasional adoption fair, a partnership with a local senior center. Donna proposed an addition. She called it, provisionally, the Right Match program. The idea was simple. Coordinate visits between children who had mobility differences, sensory differences, or other conditions that made standard pet interactions difficult, and the shelter's longer stay adult cats, the animals who had been overlooked because they were too quiet or too slow to connect, or too old to compete with kittens. Match the overlooked to the overlooked. Give each category of being the particular experience of being chosen. The shelter director, a practical man named Charles, who had been skeptical of Donna's previous proposals until they worked, and then acted as if he'd always believed in them, listened to her pitch. He asked questions about liability and insurance and volunteer training. She answered them. He said he'd think about it. He called her the next morning. "Let's try it," he said. 6 months. You run it. We measure outcomes. "I've been measuring outcomes for 11 years, Donna said. "I know what we'll find." "Probably," Charles said, "but we need the data." She ran the pilot program, It was imperfect and exhausting and underfunded and involved more paperwork than she'd anticipated, and 3 of the first 8 families couldn't make it to their scheduled visits, and 2 of the initial volunteer staff turned out to be less suited to the work than she'd hoped. 5 of the 8 visits resulted in adoptions. Donna would not describe this to anyone as a miracle, because she was not the kind of person who used that word. She would describe it as a confirmation of something she'd already known, that the right fit exists for every creature, and the job is simply to keep providing opportunities for them to find each other. John Ellis turned 6 in the spring. His birthday party was held in the apartment as usual, because logistics were easier, and because John had requested, specifically, that the party be somewhere Crystal could attend. Nicole had pointed out that Crystal was not the party type, and John had acknowledged this with great diplomatic seriousness, and said that Crystal would not be required to attend the whole party, but she should have the option. She should have the option had become something of a phrase in the Ellis household. John applied it broadly and thoughtfully, and Nicole suspected it had something to do with what he'd learned from watching a cat navigate the world on her own terms. Crystal spent most of the birthday party in John's room. At the point when the other children were occupied with cake, she emerged and sat in the hallway near the kitchen doorway and observed the proceedings with her usual composed authority. Marcus, John's friend from preschool, spotted her and went very still in the way children do when they understand instinctively that this is not a cat you approach without permission. "Can I pet her?" he asked John. "You can try," John said. "Sit on the floor and let her smell you first. Don't reach for her. Let her come to you." Marcus sat down, cross-legged on the kitchen floor. He held out his hand, low. Crystal looked at it with the measuring expression she brought to everything new. She walked over. She sniffed his hand. She did not press into it the way she pressed into John's. That particular full-face lean was reserved, and John knew it. But she tolerated the touch when Marcus slowly stroked her back, and she did not walk away. And Marcus looked up at John with the expression of someone who has received an unexpected honor. "She's amazing," he said. "I know," John said, completely without surprise. The pride in his voice was the specific pride of someone speaking about something they've always believed in, finally seeing the world come around to their view. Donna came to the party. Nicole had invited her on an impulse and then worried it was strange. What shelter worker wants to come to the birthday party of an adopted animal's owner? But Donna had said yes immediately. So quickly it had clearly not required much consideration, and she arrived with a wrapped present for John and a bag of Crystal's preferred treats and the quiet, particular warmth of someone who belongs in a room. Even if they couldn't have predicted, they'd end up in it. She sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee with Nicole while the children played, and Crystal held court from the hallway. "How is the program going?" Nicole asked. 5 adoptions out of 8 visits in the first round, Donna said. "We've had 6 more visits scheduled for next month. Charles wants to expand it." Nicole looked at her. "Mom, because of John and Crystal." "Because of what I saw when they met," Donna said. "I'd been looking at it wrong. I'd been trying to find the right human for each animal. But some animals need a specific kind of human, not better, just specific. And it goes the other way, too. And if you can make the conditions for that specificity to emerge, you don't have to manufacture the connection. It just happens." Nicole was quiet for a moment. "He talks about her constantly," she said finally. "At school, he tells people about her. His teachers say he lights up. He draws pictures of her. He told his therapist that Crystal taught him something." "What did she teach him?" Nicole smiled. "That choosing someone is different from including them. That you can tell the difference between when you're being tolerated and when you're being wanted. And that when something genuinely wants you, you feel it in your whole body." Donna was quiet for a moment. 5 years old, she said. He's 6 today, Nicole said. 6, Donna said. Right. 6 years old, and he knows that. From the hallway, they heard Crystal make the small sound she occasionally made. Not quite a meow, more of a chirrup, the sound she used when she was checking in on John from a distance. A moment later, they heard John's chair on the kitchen floor, heading toward the hallway. "Coming," he called. "I'm coming, Crystal." Nicole and Donna sat at the kitchen table, and the apartment was warm with the sounds of a birthday, and neither of them said anything for a while because some things don't need talking through. There is a particular misconception about connection, that it happens in spite of difficulty, so as a kind of reward for endurance. John and Crystal complicate that story. Their connection didn't happen in spite of anything. It happened because of specific things. John's particular way of moving through the world, which was unhurried and offered rather than grabbed. Crystal's particular way of choosing, which required real evidence before it yielded. The 14 months Crystal had waited, which had made her more selective, not less present. The 5 years John had spent watching from windows, which had made him more patient, not more closed. The difficulty wasn't incidental, it was formative. Crystal was not a better companion because she had waited. She was a more specific one. Her 9 years of building allegiance slowly and completely, first with Harold Getz, and then with the particular vacuum his death had left, it meant that when she did choose, she chose entirely. John got all of it, and John was not a better boy because of the wheelchair and the hospitals and the window watching, but he was a boy who had learned to be still, to offer, to wait without pushing. He had learned those things because the world had required them of him, and Crystal was a creature who needed exactly those things to feel safe enough to come forward. They found each other in the specific way that two particular things sometimes find each other. Not because fate arranged it, but because a shelter worker kept caring for an overlooked cat, and a mother kept looking for what her son needed, and a 5-year-old sat at the end of a corridor and held out one finger and waited. Crystal lived to be 14. She spent the last 5 years of her life in John's room, watching birds from the sill he'd built for her, sleeping near him on the nights she felt like it, coming toward the sound of his chair with the reliable certainty of something that knows where it belongs. John grew. He got bigger, and his chair got bigger, and he became, over the years, a person of notable steadiness and a particular gift for being present with things that were difficult. People, problems, situations that required patience. His teachers noticed it. His friends relied on it. His mother watched it develop with the specific gratitude of a parent who sees their child's greatest challenge quietly become their greatest strength. He kept a photograph on his desk all through middle school and high school. Not the birthday party photograph, though Nicole had framed that one for the kitchen wall. A different photograph, one Donna had sent him on his 7th birthday, taken the day he and Crystal had first met. He is in his wheelchair at the end of the corridor, one finger through the bars, face turned slightly toward the camera, without quite looking at it. And Crystal is pressed against the bars, her nose against his finger, her extraordinary eyes looking directly at him. "She sees me." That was what he'd said, and it was true in ways that neither of them had yet earned the language for, in ways that would take years and growth and accumulation before John could fully articulate what had happened in that moment, what it had meant to be chosen by something that didn't choose easily, what it had put back in him that the world kept accidentally taking away. Being seen, being chosen not out of politeness or instruction or the generous adjustments of a world still learning how to include him, but because Crystal had evaluated everything available to her in the careful, deliberate way she did all things, and arrived at a conclusion. This one, this boy, This is where I belong. And that had been enough. It had been more than enough. It had been everything. There is a particular kind of love that comes with knowing something has limited time. Nicole had done her research before the adoption. She'd read the articles and looked at the statistics and understood in a practical way that Crystal, at 9 years old, was entering the phase of her life that veterinarians called the senior years. Cats could live to 15 or beyond, but the math was what it was. John was 5. Crystal was 9. If they were lucky, really lucky, they would have 7 or 8 years together. That wasn't a small amount of time, but it wasn't forever. She hadn't told John this in specific terms. He was 5. But she'd thought about it, and she'd noticed, in the weeks after the adoption, that John seemed to have arrived at some version of this understanding on his own, not through statistics, but through the particular attentiveness he brought to Crystal. He didn't treat her like something he could defer. He treated her like something present. This was, Nicole thought, not a bad way to treat anything. The vet they found, a woman named Dr. Castillo, who had a practice 2 blocks from their apartment building and an extraordinary ability to examine cats without triggering their various objections, saw Crystal for the first time 6 days after the adoption. She did a full senior workup, blood panels and dental assessment, and the careful physical that older cats needed, and she came out of the exam room with the expression of someone who has good news and knows it. "She's in remarkable shape for her age," Dr. Castillo said. "Teeth need attention, we'll schedule that. Her kidney values are slightly elevated. Nothing concerning yet, but something to watch. Otherwise, she's healthy. Clearly, she's had good care." "She was at the shelter for over a year," Nicole said. Dr. Castillo raised her eyebrows. "Over a year, and she's this healthy. They took exceptional care of her." Nicole texted Donna. Donna texted back. "Terrence will be very pleased. He's been buying her the good food out of his own pocket for 6 months." Nicole made a note to send the shelter a gift card from John. He agreed this was important and dictated the card himself. "Thank you for taking care of Crystal before I could. She is my best friend, and also very healthy," the vet said. "From John Ellis and Crystal Ellis." Crystal Ellis. John had started calling her that about a week in, and Nicole had not corrected him because she could not figure out a single reason why she should. The dental cleaning happened 3 weeks later. Crystal came home groggy from the anesthesia, and John sat beside her bed on the floor. Not in his chair, on the floor, having transferred himself down with the practiced ease of a boy who had been working on his upper body strength for years, and did not move for 2 hours, reading quietly and occasionally touching her side very gently to confirm that she was breathing. "She's fine," Nicole said from the doorway. "The vet said she'll be back to herself by tomorrow." "I know," John said. He didn't look up. "I just want to be here when she wakes up." Crystal woke up at 6:45 that evening, lifted her head, looked at John with the disoriented expression of a cat coming out of anesthesia, and then closed her eyes again. But she pressed the top of her head against his knee before she went back to sleep. He told Dr. Castillo about this at the next appointment. "She said thank you," he explained seriously. Dr. Castillo, who had been practicing veterinary medicine for 17 years, agreed that this was probably accurate. John's kindergarten teacher was named Ms. Ibarra. She was 28 years old, in her 4th year of teaching, and she had a gift for the particular diplomacy required to manage a room full of 5-year-olds with competing developmental needs and strong opinions about snacks. She had worked with children who had various physical accommodations before, and she had learned, sometimes through trial and error, sometimes through the guidance of the school's exceptional inclusion specialist, how to create a classroom environment that neither othered anyone nor pretended that everyone was identical. John had arrived in her classroom in September quiet and observant, the kind of child who spent the first 2 weeks assessing everything before committing to anything. Ms. Ibarra had seen this pattern before and understood it. She gave him time. By October, he had quietly become one of the connective threads of the class. Not a leader in the loud, not organizing sense, but the kind of child that other children drifted toward when they were unsure. He had a quality of attention that made people feel heard, and a directness that was somehow never unkind. When he came to school in late October with Crystal stories, Ms. Ibarra had understood immediately that something important had happened. He talked about Crystal, the way children talk about things that have reorganized them. Not constantly, he wasn't monopolizing circle time, but with a regularity and specificity that told Ms. Ibarra this was a genuine attachment, a real and organizing relationship in his life. He brought in a drawing he'd made, painstakingly, of Crystal in the window. He explained to the class how to properly let a cat smell your hand before you pet it. He mentioned, during a discussion about feelings, that Crystal had helped him understand the difference between being nervous scared and being interested scared, because Crystal did both, and they looked different. "What does interested scared look like?" Ms. Ibarra had asked, because she genuinely wanted to know. John had thought about it. "Her ears go forward," he said. "When she's just scared, her ears go flat. But when she's scared, but also wants to know more, her ears go forward. Like she's asking a question." Ms. Ibarra had written this in her teaching journal that evening. She called Nicole at the end of October. "I don't usually call parents to say something is going well," she said. "I should do it more. But I wanted you to know, since the cat, John is different. Not different bad. He was never bad. But there's something. He's more settled, or like he has a place to come from now. Does that make sense?" Nicole sat with the phone pressed to her ear in the kitchen, the window dark, Crystal in the living room with the sound of the television. "Yes," she said. "It makes complete sense." He talked about her during our feelings lesson today. He said she taught him the difference between two kinds of scared. I've been teaching for 4 years, and I've never had a student explain emotional nuance through cat body language before. I wanted you to know that he's thriving." Nicole thanked her. She sat at the kitchen table for a while after she hung up. Then she went to the living room and sat on the couch, and Crystal, with her usual uncanny timing, jumped up beside her and settled into the space against Nicole's leg. "Thank you," Nicole said to the cat, and Crystal did not acknowledge this in any obvious way, but she stayed. People often assumed that Donna Peterson worked at the shelter because she was an animal lover. She was, but that wasn't why. The real answer went back 22 years, to a period in her life that she didn't discuss often, but didn't hide either. She had been 31, recently out of a marriage that had quietly hollowed her out over 7 years, living in a rented room in her sister's house, and going through the motions of a life that had lost its organizing center. Her sister had a cat, a 14-year-old orange tabby named Wallace, who was arthritic and grumpy and deeply suspicious of most humans, including Donna's sister, who had owned him for a decade and still received a flat stare of mild contempt every morning. Wallace, now for reasons that no one in the household could explain, had immediately and completely adopted Donna. He slept on her bed. He followed her to the kitchen in the mornings. He sat beside her on the couch when she watched television and occasionally deigned to put his paw on her knee, which her sister said she had literally never seen him do to another living creature in 14 years. "He hates everyone," her sister said, bewildered, the third time Wallace climbed into Donna's lap. "He doesn't hate me," Donna had said. And then, to her own surprise, she'd started crying. Not from sadness exactly, but from the sudden, overwhelming relief of being chosen by something that didn't choose easily, in a period of her life when she was not sure she had much left that was worth choosing. Wallace had lived another 2 years. He died when Donna was 33, and she had sat on the floor of her sister's living room with his body for an hour before she could get up. And the grief of it had been real and complete, and she had let it be, because anything that had given her that much deserved to be mourned that much. She'd started volunteering at the shelter 6 months later. She understood, in ways she didn't articulate to most people, that the animals she cared for were not simply waiting for homes. They were waiting for specific things, specific frequencies, specific qualities of presence that would unlock what they had to give. Her job was not to place animals. Her job was to keep them whole and available until their frequency found them. Crystal had been, in this framework, the most eloquent illustration she'd ever witnessed. And John Ellis, a 5-year-old boy in a wheelchair who had never been told what it meant for a cat to hold out for something real, had walked into the corridor that Saturday morning, already carrying exactly what Crystal had been waiting for. Donna thought about Wallace sometimes, in the years after John and Crystal's adoption. She thought about a 31-year-old woman sitting on a borrowed couch in her sister's house, hollowed out and uncertain, and an arthritic orange cat who had no reason to choose her and chose her anyway. She thought about what that had put back. She thought, yes, that's it. That's the whole thing. That's what we're here for.